Welcome to the MTA International USA Studios from Los Angeles, California. Today we have a great show on education. We are all after a great education. Most people who are successful say that they were successful because A, they had a great education, and 2, they were lucky. Now, getting a great education has various grades and various levels of attainment. Some would say it costs a lot of money. People set aside fortunes for their child's education. Today we're going to talk about education with 3 great panelists today. Starting on my right is Dr. Ahsan Khan, who's an ophthalmologist living in the Los Angeles area. He has 3 kids, one 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old boy and a 3-year-old boy. And he's the president of the Los Angeles East chapter of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Next, we have Ibrahim Naeem, who is the interim dean at Pasadena City College, which is a community college, the first 2 years of a college system. And he has 3 sons, 5 grandsons, and a great fan of chocolate. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We have something in common. And next we have Ahsan Khan Chaudhry, who is a high school teacher, a senior math instructor for the 11th and 12th grade year in the U.S. system. He has 2 kids, 2 girls, and 2 grandkids. He loves to read, travel, and repair used cars. What a fascinating hobby. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Ibrahim, frame the issue for us. What is an education system? Why is it so important to be part of an education system?
I think the greatness of this country really burgeoned from having a strong public education system. And from that, I think we attained a lot of elevation in the world in terms of our ability to have an industrial revolution, to move forward through the early history of this country and create a tremendous amount of wealth. We're a wealthy country. The education system has developed through that process with strong public education feeding into the college education, which of course is still sought the world over, the U.S. college education. So I think that sets the parameters of some of our discussion for today, because to attain access to the upper echelons of education, you have to have a good primary fundamental education. That seems to be an area that's sometimes problematic.
So in the kindergarten to 12th grade in the U.S. and in other countries, it's a little different, but if we assume the primary purpose is college and career readiness and some sort of a post-secondary education, whether it be community college, career technical education, or a 4-year university, and then if we, underneath that framework, I'll switch over to Ahsan. Tell us a little bit about what it takes to prepare students for college and careers in the kindergarten to 12th grade system.
At the elementary level, they're introduced to basic numbers and the number system. Fractions are a perennial sticking point for them, but it's an important concept to master. And then they're introduced to algebra at the 6th grade level or in the middle school, then on through geometry, pre-calculus, and calculus. All this is essential in order to progress further in the technical fields.
So math seems like it plays a huge role in the K to 12th grade system. You know, 2 studies that I've looked at. One is the Element study, which looks at the college graduation in 5 years and what's the correlation in high school, and took Algebra 2 as the base level that trumped race, socioeconomics, everything else. Just from that study alone, why is math so important? Ibrahim?
Because we have to learn to count our money. No, seriously, math is fundamental to practically everything that we do. Whether we realize it or not, everything is mathematics. And especially nowadays, since we are in a digitized world, we know that everything is really 1 and 0.
It gets it. Now, Ahsan, your career path is math and science. I mean, you're a medical doctor by profession,
right.
And you've been through the K to 12th grade education system in the U.S. You've gone to higher education, and you've got you got a medical degree as well. What were the key elements of your kindergarten to 12th grade education that contributed to your successfully completing the post-secondary education part or the college and career readiness?
Right. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think my path may not speak for the paths of my counterparts who went to the
Sure,
same
but tell
schools
us
that
your
I
path.
went to. My path, I've always been more of a verbal-oriented person, and math was never my strong suit, interestingly. But I would have to agree that I think math is part and parcel of everything we do, in any career path that you pick, even a verbal path. And I came to realize that, much later. But I would say that as math is an integral part of our tuning of our brain in whatever path we choose, so are other things such as literature and communication. And I found those to be very helpful as well. I chose a path that led me to ophthalmology. And ophthalmology is very visual, and it's actually very mathematical, optics. And optics wasn't very much my strong suit.
What is ophthalmology?
Ophthalmology is the medical science that deals with the eye, the human eye. So there's different aspects to it. There's how the eye works, which is physiology, and then there's just raw math, optics, how light bends through different substances to focus on an object. So the eye is very much like a camera, and so there's a lot of math involved. But I never looked back and said that if I was very weak in math, I couldn't become an ophthalmologist. I think you ultimately become a summation of a lot of different aspects in your education, not just one or two. I know friends who are very, very strong in math, and they're lawyers. And then you have somebody like me who is, I consider myself not the strongest, in math, but I chose the field that I did. And I knew people who are very verbose, very well written, who are engineers.
So it's a combination.
So I think there's a hybrid.
Abdullah, elementary school. Some of the panelists. You've got grandkids. He's got 3 and a 5-year-old. There's a lot of kids. What should we be doing as parents in preparing our students in elementary school for the education system? I know there's different learning styles that students have. So and our schools do one, and our school system hasn't changed for over 100 years. 100 years ago, if you were slept for 100 years and woke up, you'd still see 30 kids, 6 rows, 5 to a row. Not much has changed. But what works?
Since you mentioned the parents' role in all of this, I would say an active participation in the learning process. Even before any kid has gone off to school, parents should question the kid regarding everyday objects. How tall is this cup? It is very tall, but what do you mean by very tall? Is this very tall or is this very tall? And so on. And then you come to the realization that you need units and numbers to describe the size of an object. And then quantities can be combined in different ways. If you have 3 spoonfuls of sugar, would I make a bigger pile than with 6 teaspoons or less? So relative magnitude has to be.
So ratio proportionality really starts early.
Yes,
okay.
The earlier you begin, the better. And there are all kinds of questions and variations of questions one can bring about. The earlier the juvenile mind is required to exercise these concepts, the better for all concerned.
Ibrahim, tell us. I mean, you touch these kids at the community college level, which is once they're through this system, and math and English are 2 core components. Most states in the United States are going through these common core standards and many other things to make sure that those 2 are rigorous. But what are the other things that a student is required? I mean, what does a successful student? What does it take to be a successful student in the American education system?
Discipline, drive, focus. Those are some of the things that I see children, young people, come to school who may have some of the most all the fundamental educational requirements mastered, but if they're easily distracted, if they can't focus and really have a keen desire to succeed in the academic environment, then they're not going to succeed.
So discipline. How do I instill discipline in my children, or how do parents do that? I mean,
well, that's a hot button issue, isn't it?
Yeah. And we'll talk about it from a community perspective as well.
Well, I think the best way to instill discipline in young people, and I'm certainly not a sociologist or a psychologist, but I think in giving our children responsibility at an early age, supporting them with that responsibility, and then having some accountability. And I think those are the things that help to provide discipline. Also, to let our young people understand that this world is not just for their entertainment. Somehow that's a concept. They get in front of that those Game Boys and all
Game Boys, Xboxes,
and, Xboxes, and they think the world is just this great big fun thing. And so we have to bring them back and say, give them some measures in terms of how much entertainment is really reasonable.
In the usage and
right. Right.
Screen time. They say that the brain flatlines. You got a 3-year-old. How much TV do you allow? I mean, that's discipline.
Yeah. No. The TV regulation happens from my better half at home. She actually regulates my TV as well, come to think of it. No, but I mean, it's a fair point. I think TV regulation is very important. And it's not just so much what they're watching, because obviously nowadays there's quite variation in what you can watch and what kids can be exposed to at a young age, and it's very scary. But it's also the fact that they're watching. It's not just so much what they're watching, but the fact that that time is being taken away from other things. And I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son who are just 2 years apart in grade, and they're very, very different in their approaches to school. And I think the points that Ibrahim brought, focus and discipline, I would add attitude in there. I think, every kid brings something different to the table. I had 4 siblings, and the 5 of us are all different. And so as a parent, and I'm certainly no expert at this, but as a parent, you have to sort of know what works for each child and then focus on that aspect of it.
For instance, give me an example of that.
Yeah, so for example, my daughter, her motivation is for me to constantly remind her. Like, you have a science test coming. Did you study? Did you focus on it? She's a voracious reader, fiction reader. She loves to read. But when it's time to focus on a science test, you have to spend some time studying. She will. But then she'll get back to her book. You got to remind her. You got to remind her. Rehan, my son, he likes challenges. Do you think you can get 100% on that science test? Then he will quickly try to prove that he can. And so we've discovered that that's just the way things work. I was sort of like Rehan growing up. I needed to be challenged. Somebody had to give me, can you do this? And almost as if challenge me if I'm able to do it. But if I ask Seher, my daughter, do you think you can get 100%? She'll say, yeah, I think I can. She'll go back to reading the book. But you tell her to do something and she will stick to it and she will do it. It's just a simple example of how
it's a great example.
Kids do it in different ways.
So Abdullah, how do you scale those examples to a classroom? What do great teachers do? And there's different grades of teachers, and teaching is perhaps the most underappreciated profession. So we appreciate what you do, but how do you scale that to 30 kids whom you don't live with? You see for perhaps an hour a day, whereas a parent sees them for at least awake time more than 5 hours a day. How do you scale that to a classroom?
In the first few minutes of contact, one has to gauge their general attention level. For example, at 8 o'clock in the morning, they will have a different kind of attention span than at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. One has to gauge what span they have and then strike for the middle position and then build up on that. That way the laggards, if I may call them that, quickly speed up, and the ones who are ahead are comfortable, but they're still challenged. So throughout the period, and it's usually a 1 hour period, one has to up the challenge, or the word is ant or anti. One has to keep raising one's level of discourse with them so that they don't get a chance to slip back into a sleepy haze of thought.
And how does a student impress their teachers? I mean, most students want to succeed. I don't know many students who don't. They're lazy or they're not motivated, or you can come up with many words. But from a student perspective, what is a student-teacher relationship like?
Ideally, the student-teacher relationship should be one of honesty and respect. And I'm very fortunate. I think in most of my classes I've achieved that relationship with my students. So it should be such that if the student comes to just one class a day, it will be my class. And I'm lucky that that relationship has occurred, and I hope it continues to be that way. And I think a little bit of avuncular attitude, a kind of guardianship attitude, is also good to have. In other words, if a kid has been playing some pranks which are not serious, the teacher must make it clear that it's okay up to a certain point.
Yeah, so Ibrahim, another example I'd like to use is if there's a classroom of 30 kids, and you know, your Abdul Ahad is number 1 in that class, and we force rank him, and Ahsan is number 30, and you're the teacher. Theory goes that you will be teaching to number 16, one behind the middle. So he'll be bored, Abdul Ahad will be bored, Ahsan will be lost. And when we hear about this in the classroom, and you know, Abdul Ahad, as a real teacher, you know, you've got to entertain 30 kids, but if you're lecturing, you're teaching somewhere right in the middle, one behind the middle, and all this happens. And yeah, how do you manage? And so what are some ways where students and parents can play a more active role, or teachers can play a different role in addressing that challenge?
All right, let me go with the teachers first.
Okay.
A lot of teachers nowadays, I see, take that scenario, and to deal with it, they will divide the class up into groups. And those groupings will have the students either in groups that are pretty close to their level, so that they do not feel too far behind, too far ahead of the discussion that's going on. And so that way, you know, that's a managing technique. Parents, I'm not so sure, and I think we'll probably talk more about some of the challenges that parents have, because in today's world, with both parents working probably out of the house majority of the time,
there's a big challenge.
The amount of time that they can spend or choose to spend in that role is minimal at best, and so that does create a problem.
So as a community leader, I mean, you have hundreds of kids that belong to your local chapter of the Ahmadi Muslim community. What can a community do to help students attain excellence in our public education system?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can provide, you can enhance the education experience that's already in place. So you can't replace it. So as Ibrahim mentioned in the outset, we're blessed in this country with a very good education system. Now you look at the rankings, and sometimes we're not way up at the top, or sometimes we're lower than we should be, and we know those statistics. But when you think about it, in a country that's so big and so complicated, and there's so many socioeconomic factors, the fact that we have a robust public education system is something that we should be very proud of. And I don't think anybody's out to replace it. But in a community, any community, whether it's a faith-based community or if it's an after-school program, what you can do is you can provide some color to that education. You can enhance it, you can add it. So where we're sitting here is at Beth El-Hamid Mosque in Chino, California, and I'm serving in a capacity as a president of the chapter. And we have a Sunday school here. And the Sunday school has 110 students now. And it's basically a process of evolution that's gone on for about 3-4 years. And what we do is we teach spirituality and religious studies, history, and we teach mannerisms, you know, gratitude, very basic fundamental core values that transcend any specific religion. We basically tell them that, look, you have school 5 days a week, focus, enjoy it. And then when you come on Sunday, maybe we can enhance it in a different way. Get people to feel that not only do they have school where there's a source of education, but they can come to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a YMCA, or they can come to a community center and they can enhance that education. So I think, to answer your question, a community's role or a community center's role is to enhance the educational experience that's already there. One thing I would add, just backpedaling a little, you had asked a question to our esteemed teacher, Abdul Ahad, about what a teacher can do to capture maybe the outliers, the person who's maybe an overachiever who gets bored, or somebody who's really lost. And I can give you the example of Abdul Ahad himself, because I have had the good fortune of being a student in his class. So Abdul Ahad he's taught at the school district that I was in, and his children went to the same school district that I did. And I've had the opportunity to observe him as a teacher. And then when we were students in this class...
So what did he do?
Yeah, so Abdul Ahad was my teacher here in this very Sunday academy I was talking about. It took on a different form. And he did something that I've never seen a teacher do. We were a group of maybe 15, 20 students. And he would come in, and the first day I remember, he would ask every student what their name was. And we would say our name. And then he would then say our names by memory immediately after that. It was an exercise in memory, and he would challenge himself to do that. And I wondered why he did that. I wondered, is he just trying to impress us with his amazing memory, which God has blessed him with? And what he did was he hooked all of us in. These outliers, he connected with the outliers.
Great teachers connect well with their students.
The key word is connection, and not every teacher can do that. And so that's one way to do it, is to connect.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a really nasty example, Ibrahim. In the American education system, there's this nasty thing called the achievement gap, and there's different types. The one I'm talking about is the difference between Caucasian students and Hispanic and African American students in America. You pick your number, it's about 30% points on gap. And when people are asked off the street why that is, there are two simplistic answers for it. One is that, well, you know, these kids, Hispanic and African American parents, they just don't care about their child's education, so therefore they perform 30 percentage points lower. And then on the other side, the other extreme is our schools are racist, our teachers are racist, so therefore they don't teach the Hispanic and African American kids as well as they teach the Caucasian kids. So just staying on that, tell us about this achievement gap. Why does it persist, and are there solutions for it?
Yes, it's real. It does persist, and we have to find solutions for it. Some of the things that are mentioned as probably causes may have some element of truth to them. As difficult as it might be to just digest that, it's like, well, yes, there probably is some truth to that. If you look at, I'm African American, obviously, so let's talk about my experience. If you look at slavery, one of the things that was a byproduct of slavery is that African Americans were forbidden to learn to read. You risk your life if you learn to read. So there's a whole legacy of suppression of intellectual achievement that was certainly belayed in the early history of African Americans, when you have such wonderful thinkers like George Washington Carver, W.B. Du Bois, or Frederick Douglass, and many others. So you know, the capability always has been there. And then you go through the whole legacy of Jim Crow and segregation, where we were in segregated schools. We received the books that the other schools were discarding while they got their new books, and so that was just the reality. And so, but from that, again, you saw excellence rise in terms of what.
But Ibrahim, that is a very sad part of the American history. But one would argue that it's history. Nowadays, our systems are equal. We don't have segregation, so therefore, why does this gap still persist?
Because we still do have segregation. And when you look at the de facto segregation in the American school system, it's still just about as bad as it ever was.
What do you mean?
We don't have really true integration. Now, in some school districts, you may have that, but even if in the segregated system, and I don't want to belabor this, but if even in a segregated system, when you had teachers who cared and who saw the potential in students and who really did empathize with them, you saw those students excel. Hence, the whole legacy of the historically black colleges and universities. Sure. So now, today's solution. And today's solution requires parents to be more engaged, and teaching those parents and helping those parents to become more engaged. The challenge with that is when you have generations of parents who have had very difficult relationships with the school system themselves, they don't feel comfortable in that system at all to be effective advocates for their own children.
So that's a great framing of a sad statistic in the American education system, and one would say maybe a worldwide issue as well. Let's just focus on the teaching profession. Are there professional development for teachers? Are there things that teachers can do to help close this gap?
Certainly. There are strict standards for teachers, and they are pretty strong here in California, especially very demanding. But one escapism that senior administration or senior teachers get through, and they shouldn't be able to do so in schools, is this. When a newbie arrives on campus, a new teacher, he or she is given the toughest class to deal with, whereas it should be the opposite. The most experienced teachers should have the toughest class, and the newbies should get the most disciplined class. But
is that a seniority issue?
no, it's a simple matter of their being able to call the shots. It is not a written rule anywhere, but the senior teachers usually do this, and the administrator goes along. And so we end up with the newbies having the toughest toughest classes, and then the toughest kids, or the kids in the toughest class, remain unfortunate for year and year and year after year.
But I mean, the achievement gap issue, though, how are teachers trained on that issue? Do they know about it?
Yes.
Is there an implicit bias? I mean, what are the issues here?
In their training courses, teachers are taught to fight any bias that they may have, although no one is perfect in fighting that in himself or herself. But the bias, the existence of the bias is made clear, and teachers are trained to fight it and to attempt to have the fruits of education reach every person. But as I've said, the newbies get tired the easiest.
And most teachers don't last long enough.
That's
I mean,
true.
it takes about 3 to 5 years to get going.
Exactly.
Here, Ahsan, from a community perspective, I don't know how, you may not know as much as these experts on the issue, but it's a pretty startling figure.
Yes.
What can you or will you do as a community to address this gap?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and you're right. I'm no expert on this. In fact, I actually just learned a lot listening to them, and it's actually very discouraging to hear that there are some undertones of segregation even now, which translates into an achievement gap. And I suppose as a community, we can try to look closer into each individual child and kind of see where they stand, and maybe create some sort of a better rapport with their parents, with their family structure. Because
technology could play a role in that too.
Yes, you're right. Technology can play a role in that. You know, I think the role of a community is also to strengthen that bond between the parents and the child, and explain to the child before they leave that, look, your best source of education is your parents. I've always felt that going to school isn't your source of education, it's your source of accountability. You know, how well you're going to do on tests and do that. But the real education happens when you're doing the homework and your parents are holding you accountable.
We've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask each one of you. It wouldn't be a topic to discuss education without telling us about your favorite teacher. So it's going to be lightning round. So in about 15 seconds, tell us about your favorite teacher and why.
Yeah, my favorite teacher was Mr. Koopson, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. I loved him. He always thought outside of the box. He would sometimes take our classes out into the garden and just teach us to get us some sunlight. And I never forget him. I always appreciate him. And even now when I teach children, I always think of his strategies and I always try to employ those.
Ibrahim?
Louise McBain, she taught trigonometry and solid geometry. And one of my math teachers that really encouraged me to do as well as I could do, because a lot of times I think there's a psychology that says, oh man, I can't do this math. And so she said, no, you're going to do the math. So
Motivated you.
It's amazing, amazing. But she wasn't easy on you either.
No, she held me accountable.
My favorite teacher was Professor Dr. Philip Arms at Wayland University in Texas. That was, of course, way past my high school. But he first showed me that a true teacher, a good teacher, can be humble, can be forgiving, and can also hold himself or herself accountable. He would apologize much more frequently than he would make us apologize, although he may not have committed an error. But his humility really showed me what a good teacher could be.
Interesting.
Very good.
Wow, great. And then a quick 10-second blurb on what is the community college system?
The California Community College System is a system for community colleges from freshman, junior year education.
That's grade 13, 14, and 15.
Yes, but one of the things, workforce preparedness, there's been a whole focus now, the state's reshifting its focus in terms of workforce preparedness.
They address that.
Community colleges are at the forefront in terms of bringing people in, getting them certificated, getting them some usable skills quickly.
Great. I'd like to thank all three of you for being on the show. This has been fascinating. And we've learned a lot about the kindergarten to 12th grade education system, how math plays a key role in the kindergarten to 12th grade education system to prepare students for college and careers. We've learned about how higher education can be attained by great teachers, great parenting skills, and how a community can come together to support a child's public education system. This has been a great show of the MTA International Studios in the United States of America at Los Angeles, California. Thank you for being with us.